like our speakers tonight are well known to Grosse Pointe Audubon. Obviously, they've been members of our organization since probably since the beginning of recorded time. And On a personal note, we all owe a debt of thanks to Mike and Judy because they're donating their Zoom account for us to hold these Grosse Pointe Audubon meetings. Thank you very much, Mike and Judy. Anyways, Mike and Judy are two people I admire because, well, they're just good people. So without any additional announcements or anything, thank you, Mike and Judy.
Thank you, Bill, and the Grosse Pointe Audubon. As you can see, Judy and I went to Cuba in March. And all the photos in here I took or Judy took, so this is our program. I did grab a few things from the internet, which I'll explain as we get into this. So why the heck do you want to go to Cuba? Well, one, it is really quite close. And you have 27 endemic species in Cuba, although there has been some conflict. When I did research on this, some places said 26, some places said 28, but anyway, it's in that area of species that you will only see in Cuba. So the only way to see them is to go there. And the other thing is, of course, the weather is wonderful there, except of course, as I pointed out here, if hurricanes are coming through as they have for the last couple months, they just had one, in fact, this about a week ago. So that's one challenge. You don't want to go there during the summer. There are some restrictions, obviously, for American citizens who want to go to Cuba. It's not that complicated, but yet there are some requirements. Remember that in 2014, Obama opened things up. In fact, there were cruise ships going down there from the US. But then in 2017, the Trump administration kind of cut those back. But luckily, for humanitarian reasons, you can still do ornithological or birding study trips in Cuba. When you book your flight there, in fact, you have to actually choose from a laundry list of the purpose of your trip, which you, of course, normally don't do if you were flying to LA or to Chicago or something, you just book it. You are required to literally buy health insurance because Cuba, of course, has a national health program for everybody. So you are required, and you can buy that usually when you buy your ticket. You obviously need a passport that's good for at least 12 months beyond your time there. You have to show that you're going to come back, proof of departure that you're coming back. You have to show lodging where you're going to be. You have to buy a visa, which can be done online or through your airlines, cost $50, $85. Again, you have to tell them the purpose of your trip. And the statement of your purpose upon return, that is what you're going to be doing with that. And usually your tour company is going to give you all that information to help you guide through that, those requirements. So a few things about Cuba. The population is a little over 11 million compared to Michigan's 9.9 million. Area 42,000 square miles versus Michigan's more than twice as large. Havana, of course, is the biggest city, 2.1 million. And since 1965, that's when Fidel Castro kind of took over, Communist Party, then took control of everything. However, another thing is since the mid-1990s, sugarcane was a major primary source of all kinds of income for them, but it's much, much less today. In fact, we saw a lot of empty sugarcane processing plants while we were there. We traveled through Global Travel, which is Partnerships for International Birding. We've done several trips with them. They're out of Denver, Colorado. So.
And you're probably wondering, why would we go to Cuba when there's a pandemic? Well, we made arrangements for this trip back in August of 2019. And as we started getting news about the coronavirus in Washington State back in February, we were getting a little concerned about whether or not we would have some problems about going on the trip. We did contact the tour company. They told us the trip was a go. We left on March 7th, and the virus really had not taken hold yet. It had started in China, and then it was becoming a more and more serious health concern. We did find out on March 12th that Italy had over 200 COVID deaths, and more cases, about 1,000 had come to the US. And there were major cancellations, not only of schools, but also lots of sporting events. And then on March 14th, the US flights to the UK were halted. There was chaos at the airports. The schools and colleges were closed. And the country was pretty much on shutdown. And of course, we were in Cuba. At the time we left Cuba on the 17th, they only had about 5 cases in that country. So we were fortunate enough to get there and get back. And with that, we'll take you on our little journey.
So we flew out of Atlanta, Georgia. In fact, I think there's only Atlanta and maybe Miami are the 2 airports that you can fly directly to Havana. So anyway, here's some other important things about birds there. There's nearly 400 different species that have been recorded, but the important thing, of course, are the 27 endemics. There's also a lot of endemics that are endemics to the Caribbean or the West Indian areas. So here's the 10 different areas for the 10 days that we were in Cuba. You can see we started in Havana. We then traveled from Havana over here to the western end of the island. Then we traveled from there, a long drive into the Zapata area. We spent 3 days in this area. Then we traveled another long day to Camagüey down in here. And at the very end, we ended up in the Cayo area. This area, by the way, is a huge resort area. I don't think any Cubans even live close to this. It's kind of like a Miami Beach area. It's full of resorts. They're all quite new, primarily Canadians and Europeans. When they come here for vacation or winter escapes, this is the part of Cuba that they would visit. So anyway, we get in Havana, we're picked up at the airport, and they take us to this. I'm thinking, what is this? Well, this is actually where we're going to stay. In fact, you can see there's the door. So a rather famous artist in Havana painted this entryway to this nice place. On the outside, doesn't look that attractive, but as you can see on the inside, it was actually quite surprising how nice it was on the inside. And we just spent our first night here and then left the next day for our trip. While we were here though, we did have some other nice resting places in the hotel. We did go out and catch a few sights. We got the Capitol building, which was walking distance from our hotel. The Che Guevara Mausoleum wasn't too far away. And then the statue of Jose Marti. He's really an incredibly important historical figure to Cuba because he's really the ones that gave Cuba their independence or statehood from Spain, probably in the late 1800s. And of course, we did see while we traveled some billboards that have the Cuban iron fist up against the face of Uncle Sam. Okay, so some other sights and sounds. We even went into a restaurant that had some paintings on the wall. One of them was of Obama.
And also Queen Elizabeth.
And was Queen Elizabeth was to the left. And of course, we see a lot of these old cars, American cars throughout Havana. Yep, there they are. And as you remember, the American manufacturers stopped. They couldn't put import or export cars into Cuba starting, I think, in the early 60s. So that's pretty much where all these cars are from. And today they're pretty much tourist vehicles. Our guide told us, he says, yeah, they're all convertibles, but they weren't originally convertibles. As you can imagine, for a tourist, you don't, if you had a hard top, you want to get rid of it because it's more attractive as a tourist vehicle. So we had our last dinner before we checked out, and on the right here is our guide, and Judy's going to tell you a little bit about our guide.
Our guide's name was Luis Diaz, and he's a professor at a local university in Cuba. He has a degree in herpetology, the study of amphibians and reptiles. He earns $50 a month as a professor and pays a lot of taxes to the Cuban government. He makes much more money being a bird tour guide, both with his the fees that he charges plus the tips that the birders give him. Although we are a little concerned right now because I don't think there are very many tours going on in Cuba because of COVID. So it'll be interesting to see how these bird guides can survive with the coronavirus.
In fact, had communication with a much younger guy that we had when we were in the KO area. And I just got an email from him, and he did mention that the fact that there's just no tourism business for him to provide guiding to. So the wonderful thing, one of the very nice things was we had a wonderful bus. We only had 10 of us, but the bus probably held maybe 30 people. So we had plenty of room. We all had plenty of space to spread out. And we had a nice driver, Carlos, who took care of us. But yeah, brand new, modern bus, air conditioned, very pleasant way to travel while we were moving around the country of Cuba. So our first area on day one, Las Terrazas. So is a bio reserve. And you can see we're hiking down the road. And some of our first life birds, the West Indian woodpecker, sitting at the top here in a nice hole. And here's what the West Indian woodpecker sounds like. Now, I didn't record that, but it's easy to get these recordings on the internet. So I have a lot of the calls for some of the major birds that we saw. Then only a few minutes later, we pick up the Fernandini's flicker, a couple on the right there and one on the left. Again, this is a population that's really is threatened. Estimated 600 to 800 of them are left endangered because, of course, habitat loss is the major thing that's impacted them. And it sounds like this. And actually, in the kind of the same area, we picked up the Cuban oriole, which isn't one of the endemics that we were targeting. Sometimes called the black cowled oriole, but in the Cuban, there were several species of this bird, 3 different ones. But in 2010, this particular Cuban oriole was given its own status, so it became a unique bird to Cuba. And it was on this wonderful flower tree that we don't know the name of it. And it sounds like this. Along with a bee, I think, humming in the background. And actually, a little bit later, we picked up the greater Antillean grackle. Actually, he's a pretty common bird, and he actually lives around people, so you would see him a lot, and it makes this kind of a call. I'll go back there. Okay.
Bill has just given us the name of that beautiful pink flower with the oriole. It's the bottlebrush tree.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Then, probably one of the more famous birds, the Cuban trogon, which is actually the national bird of Cuba. And it's also lives in the heavily degraded former forest, but it's the national bird and it has a great call. Once you hear this, you can identify it easily. And it is another one of the endemics. We did see this bird or heard him almost every day, I think, that we were out. The Western Spindalis, sometimes called the stripe-headed tanager, he didn't cooperate. This is the best I could get. Anyway, he's found also sometimes seen in southeastern Florida, Western Caribbean, Cozumel, Cayman Islands, in addition to Cuba. So it's not really an endemic, but it's seen in several places in the Caribbean. Rather chatty guy. Another endemic we saw the same day, Cuban green woodpecker. Wonderful yellow, nice red throat, red on the back of the head, nice black eye bar. And we're going to hear him too. Nice call. And of course, they have their own blackbird, the Cuban blackbird, and it's seen everywhere, very common throughout the country. And it sounds like this. Almost a Peter like our titmouse, huh? Then we did go to some places where they had a lot of seed stations for birds, and the common one we got here was this yellow-faced grass quip, but it's really native to Central and South America, and it's actually closely related to the famous Darwin finches. And it's quite chatty, sounds like this. Nice trill. Another bird that was seen with it is the Cuban grass quip. You know, was also seen at these seed eating stations. Now their population has been declining in Cuba. It's due to the illegal trade, and people hunt these too, but mostly the trade. In fact, from what I read, that a lot of the Cuban Americans who live in the Miami area in Florida may have these as pets in their house in cages. So that's what's happening. I think a lot of the American Cubans want these as to think of them as pets, think of Cuba, their home. So it is kind of declining population. A beautiful bird though, and it sounds like this. This is a loggerhead kingbird, and again, seen in a lot of the Caribbean islands, similar to other flycatchers that we see here in North America. And it sounds like this. Great trill. Yeah, they have their own owl in Cuba, the Cuban pygmy owl. It's endemic. We saw him more than once. Again, it's one of the most frequently observed of the Cuban owls. There's another owl we'll see a little bit later. And they usually, as the note says, breed in tree holes formerly used by woodpeckers. And it has a call like this. There you go. And they have a nice thrush called the red-legged thrush, but it is native to a lot of the Caribbean islands, so it's not unique to Cuba in any way. But beautiful red legs. We did see him, as you can see here, this is in a lawn outside of a building. We came across this large group of pelicans, and they were in these big commercial fish ponds. In fact, we could see probably the owner of the fish pond. He was waving his arms, trying to scare them away, because obviously his commercial fish farm was taking a beating because these pelicans were feasting on the fish that were in these ponds, just having a big time eating his product. La Sagres flycatcher. It breeds in Cuba, but it is seen in some of the other islands in the Caribbean. And it sounds common short flycatcher call. The great lizard cuckoo. We caught him. He's the largest of the lizard cuckoos in the Caribbean. And when he flies, his tail flares out and is quite the sight to see. And it has a call like this. So once you hear that, you know this cuckoo. And this was at the end of our first day. We had 8 endemics, and we added, I think we added 27 birds to our life list on that day. So it was a pretty good day. Anyway, moving on to our first night outside of Havana, and we did some birding right outside this hotel, which you can see here in the lower left. Of course, we had some souvenirs. So we picked up the scaly nape pigeon. You look at his neck here, scaly, very scaly. And he's seen throughout the Caribbean islands. And this was one of the major target endemic birds, the smallest bird in the world, the bee hummingbird. Now, to give you some perspective, it weighs anywhere from 0.56 to 0.01 of an ounce. Compared to down here, I have the dimensions for ruby-throated, which we see here in Michigan. Its weight is 0.7 up to 0.2, 0.07 to 0.2. So the heaviest bee eater is equal to the lightest ruby throat. Then on its size, the bee is anywhere from 2 to 2.4 inches versus the ruby throated is 2.8 to 3.5. And Judy's going to tell you where we found this bird.
Well, this bird was found in a little town called Palpite at the Casa del Bernabe. It's really Bernabe's house. And he has a series of feeders all over his back garden. And this was the best way that we were able to see the bee hummingbird in this environment. We also saw a lot of warblers, some of our winter migrants, which you'll see pictures of here. But I don't think if we had not been at Bernabe's house, I don't think we would have had as good a view of the bee hummingbird. And the bee hummingbird, if you think about its habitat, the Zapata Peninsula, which is one of the most important conservation areas in Cuba, it is also the stronghold for this little bird, the bee hummingbird. So that's why there's so much surveying going on when these birding groups go into Cuba.
And the bee hummingbird sounds like this.
And the female is on the left and the male is the bottom, middle, and the right. So you can see the differences in their colors.
And in the same location, we also picked up the black-throated blue, which of course is a common migrant that passes through Michigan in the spring and the fall. And we also had in the same location the Cuban emerald, which is another hummer that's in Cuba, but it's not unique to Cuba. It's also in some of the Western Bahamas. Northern Parula was also seen in the same location because all these feeders brought all these birds in. We did see a few things other than birds. We have the circle-tailed lizard, the giant anole, and we came across the hummingbird moth, which is a very large moth. And when you first see it, you might think you're looking at a hummingbird, but it's a big moth. So when we were going to the Zapata Peninsula, our wonderful vehicle up here wasn't really able to take us down the road we had to go. We had to go down about a 10-mile road. So we transferred to this other truck, and you can see on the lower right here, wasn't the most comfortable seating or ride. And we probably had about a 45-minute,
About 10 miles.
10-mile slow ride down to the end of this swampy road. So that was what we started off with. And I think what's on our way there, we smelt something burning.
Rubber, we smelled rubber.
Rubber or whatever. And the truck had picked up this prawn and it was frictioning here and melting. And didn't really cause any damage, but it did cause the odor, which caused us some concern, but we were okay. And some other common sites in Cuba, other types of transportation. You'll notice this guy's right. They don't really have full saddles. He doesn't have a saddle at all, and he's got a rope here. He does have a saddle, the stirrups, and a better bridle, but they were pretty crude with respect to their horses. So then when we were down there, we do pick up the Zapata wren, another endemic, and singing away for us, as you can see, and does this. Singing away. And not too far in the same area, we picked up the Zapata sparrow, nice yellow chest, brown cap, white throat, and he sings this way. And another endemic, the yellow-headed warbler, for some time was formerly placed with the Parula family, but is now in the Cuban warbler family, so it's all kind of by itself. It is a sister species of a fellow endemic called the Oriente warbler, which we'll see eventually in our program here. So it sings away like this. And of course, common herons and egrets that we might have in the southern part of the US do winter in Cuba. So we did see these when we were in this marshy, swampy area. Cuban black hawk, another endemic to Cuba. It actually has been listed near threatened since 2008. And it has quite a strong call. And the Cuban nightjar, can't believe we found this, but here it was sitting there. Sometimes in other parts of the world called the Greater Antillean nightjar, but this is the uniquely Cuban one, and he has this call. So we didn't see him move because during the day they're usually sleeping like this. Cuban parrot, it's not endemic because it is found in some of the other Caribbean islands. We only saw the one, but typically when you see these guys, you'll see flocks of them, and they're quite chatty, and they'll all be talking to each other like this. As you can see, they're usually large groups of them. So then we moved on to day 4, where we visited this refuge to pick up the uniquely quail doves. There are also, some of them are at high risk in Cuba because they're still being hunted, even though they're protected, people still hunt them. So we had the blue-headed quail dove, which is endemic to Cuba. It was, as you can see from my note here, it was very common at one time, but evidently it tastes very nice. So it is illegal today to hunt them, but people are still doing it evidently. So the populations are very low. Then we have the gray fronted quail dove, which is also endemic. And it's also threatened, in this case, by habitat loss, not so much by hunting. We saw both of these quails next to each other, by the way. They're all in the same area. As well as a Zenata dove, which is also seen throughout Caribbean and the Yucatan Peninsula. All these doves indeed were all seen probably within about 30 meters of each other, all on the ground with a lot of other birders watching them behind a fence. Then we moved on to another part. We picked up the bare-legged owl. It was formerly known as the Cuban screech owl. It comes from the featherless green-yellow legs. And Judy's going to tell you a little bit about this guy.
Well, this owl, it's really interesting because you can't really see him as you approach the trees. What the tour guide did was actually knocked on the tree, and they would knock on the base of the tree and they would wait a few seconds. If nothing happened, they would knock again. And when we were there, the male flew out of the tree after he knocked, and then the female peeked out, and this is when Mike got the picture. Now in this particular area, these birds nest in dead Cuban palm trees. And the area where we were, there were actually 60 pairs when we found this pair.
Then we also visited this botanical garden. And we didn't get a lot of birds here, but we did see a lot of very unique birds. One of the interesting things, we have this do not do signs. We have, don't start fires, don't park, don't have your gun, don't smoke, don't throw your trash. The one that I had a hard time with this was, it has this do not, and then there's a pencil. And what they were trying to tell you is they don't want you carving your name into the side of the tree. They probably should have put a knife there, but obviously you can take photographs and watch the birds.
Now this botanical gardens is in the city of Cienfuegos. It's the oldest botanical gardens in Cuba. and it serves as a model for future tropical gardens. It was founded in 1901 by US sugar baron Edward Atkins. Control of this was passed on to Harvard University under the name of the Harvard Botanical Station for Tropical Research and Sugarcane Investigation. While the garden was primarily devoted to the improvement of sugarcane for commercial purposes, it was also the site of research in other areas of tropical agriculture and botany. It currently has over 2,000 species of plants, 23 types of bamboo, 65 different fig tree species, and 280 different types of palm trees. The calabash tree, if you see this, this round green fruit, it's actually used to make the maracas. You know, the musical maracas that the singers and the bands, the locals use.
So over 200 different types of palm trees. Who knew?
Right.
So then finally we moved on to Guanaco to see
Guanaco.
to see the American flamingos. And I had asked our guide ahead of time, since he said we'd be in boat. I said, well, how many people in a boat? I'm thinking we got 10 of us. We'll probably all fit in a pontoon boat with a crew and we'll be out there enjoying that. And he says, oh no, there's only maybe 2 or 3 people in a boat. Thinking, I wonder what this is going to look like. Well, here's a clue. We were expecting larger boats, maybe with motors. No, these tiny boats. And we're going to, there's a local guide that was going to do all the paddling for us to get us out there. Our oarsman. And so, yeah, plenty of room for us, he said sarcastically. And so we loaded up. And you'll notice, which I also found unusual, usually you have the oarsman sitting in the middle of the boat. Not in these boats, the oarsman was in the bow of the boat. But anyway, here we come, flamingos. As you can see, not a whole lot of room for the boat. The boat's sinking in the water. We're only a few inches above the water as we head out there. So anyway, we do find the American flamingo. There was probably 300 or 400 of them.
600 to 700.
600 to 700.
Yes.
These ones that have a lot of white are the immature flamingos. And you've probably seen flamingos in the zoo, but one thing about that's nice about seeing them in the wild, you get to see them fly. So.
And the other thing about these flamingos, we saw 600 to 700 of them when we were there, but during breeding season, they can have well over 1,200 to 1,500 in the same location.
So you wonder, I didn't do this, but I do have a video here showing you how the flamingo feeds when its head's underwater. He thinks. There we go. It's going to run. It's probably taken out of zoo. See why that beak is curled the way it is, because that exactly helps them pick up stuff from the bottom. Obviously, some other common sightings we have here: the yellow-crowned night heron, the brown pelican, the avocet, and the great egrets were also seen in the same area as the flamingos. Moving on, the Cuban wood pewee, also those seen in the Bahamas, as well as Cuba. And another endemic, the Cuban gnatcatcher, looks very similar to our gnatcatcher, but he's a unique species. And when he talks like this. Not quite the same as our gnatcatcher. Eastern meadowlark, you're surprised to see. Of course, it's a common North American bird. And we also picked up the yellow-throated warbler, which are also common in southeastern US. It breeds in North America, so anywhere from Pennsylvania, Missouri, Gulf of Mexico. And the giant kingbird. Now, when you hear that the name of a bird is the giant kingbird, you think it's because it's really large. No, the bird is typical of all the other kingbirds. What's really large is the beak. It's a very heavy beak, as you can see from these images. It's a very heavy beak. So that's why it gets the giant name. Another different cuckoo, the mangrove cuckoo. You can pick up this cuckoo in Florida. In fact, Judy and I have seen this, the mangrove cuckoo in Florida, although it's not easy to pick up, but it is down there. And here's the other warbler, the Oriente warbler, which is the sister to the Cuban endemic, to the yellow-headed warbler. It's found in extreme western Cuba. And when it sings, and it's got this beautiful yellow chest, it sounds like this. One more. There you go. And finally, moving on the Cayo area, we picked up the Bahama mockingbird, but it's also found in the Bahamas and Jamaica and some of the other Caribbean islands. And it's like evidently occasionally shows up in Florida, probably when hurricanes blow it up there. Looks like quite a bit though, like our mockingbird. And then we had this clapper rail just come out and really show off for us. Normally you don't see these guys, you hear them only, or if you see them, you just get these very brief glimpses. This guy came out and was squawking at us. The sun was low, so it's lighting them up. And we really watched him for quite a while. It's quite amazing to see him out like that. Rails, you just don't see them very often out in the open. West Indian whistling duck, also found in some of the other Caribbean islands. And they make a lot of chat, and you can hear why they call them the whistling duck. They're all whistling to each other. And I think our last endemic that I got photographs of is the Cuban bullfinch. Oh, no, you're right. It isn't the last one. Anyway, it used to be considered part of the tanager family, or still was, but it belongs to the finches. So, and it's also related to the famous Darwin finches, and it has this not very exciting call. There you go. Again, some other common birds we picked up. Still sandpiper, black-necked still, ovenbird, great catbird. Again, these are birds you might pick up here in U.S. And probably our most popular bird, Judy's most
My
popular
favorite.
bird.
Oh, yeah.
The
The Cuban
Cuban
toady.
toady is endemic. He's really tiny, probably chickadee size. And we did see him or hear him on several occasions. Sounds like this. So great bird, great color, wonderful to see, wonderful to hear.
Beautiful.
So on our total trip here, we saw 168 different species of birds. We added 52 birds to our life list, and we did see 25 of the endemics in Cuba. So that's me using the lens that I use to capture all those images.
Wow.
All right.
Stop sharing.
So,
Mike,
yes.
you had that list of all the birds you saw and the endemics, etc. So the question is, how many photos did you actually take while you were traveling there? How many thousands of photos did you take?
You know, I had that number one time. It was probably, I don't know, probably around 10,000, I guess. I'm not.
Wow.
I mean, there were times where, you know, because you don't see birds all the time while you're out birding, as you know. So.
Fortunately, he didn't show you all 10,000
Yeah.
this evening.
Darn. Hey, Mike,
Yeah.
I have a question. So why is Cuba, why is there specific species just in Cuba? Is it the temperature, the climate? Why is that anyway?
Well, it's climate and habitat.
Well, primarily, I think the major deal is it's an island that's the birds probably don't have the desire or the strength or to fly over water to go to another piece of land. So they just stay there. Where other birds do travel from Cuba to other islands and so forth. I think it's the fact that it's an island more than anything
Okay.
else.
So they've been there all their lives then, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh, okay, all right.
Hey, Frank, you'll be freaked out to know that the fossil history of Cuba is really interesting. There are records of 6 foot tall owls that they did not fly; they ran, but there's evidence that they hunted together in pairs. So yeah, Cuba, 6 foot tall owls.
All
Wow.
right, we're going.
Mike, I have a question. What was the size of that lens you were using?
That's the Tamron 150 to 600.
Ah,
And then I used it on a crop sensor, so you get a field of view of a 900.
Good presentation, Mike. Thanks a lot. Good job.
Welcome. Okay,
fantastic.
job.
Yeah,
Yeah, wonderful presentation.
thank you.
wow, very nice.
Thanks for including me.
Thank you for
All right,
coming.
Welcome.
I thought the sounds were really good to have too, to get an
Oh,
idea
yeah.
of what they sounded like. I
So-
thought that was a good ad.
Mike and Judy, what was the food like?
The food was great. We had seafood, we had lots of good salads, we had plantains, we had rice and beans, the typical staples of Cuba.
A lot of rice and beans.
But the food was excellent. The accommodations were very nice. We stayed in some really, really nice places, and the people took really good care of us. And the Cuban people are very friendly. They're excited to see people visiting their country, and they're very passionate about their country. They really, you see a lot of poverty there, unfortunately. But it was really nice. We could interact with them once in a while, and it was really nice to see that they welcomed us there. So it was a really, really positive experience.
So Judy, did you smoke any Cuban cigars while you were there?
I did not smoke any Cuban cigars. There were a lot of Cuban cigars for sale, though.
Yes.
There was no water problems or anything like that, right?
Well, you can't drink the water. You
The
have
tap water.
the tap water. You have to
Okay.
go, all the places where we ate and the places where we stayed, either there's bottled water for you, or our guide would tell us the water was safe. So we had no problems there. And we didn't have to have any vaccines, any vaccinations or anything for the trip.
Oh, you
because-
didn't?
Because anything that
Wow.
we needed, we had already had from previous trips.
Yeah, it's possible that if you've not done international traveling,
Right.
there might be some shots. We've done quite a few international trips from Africa and the Galapagos, Costa
Oh.
Rica, Panama.
Panama,
So
yeah.
we've had a lot of vaccinations related to those. So
Right.
if there was anything unique to Cuba, we probably already had it. So we
Right.
didn't have to get anything special.
Uh-huh.
Right.
One of the big challenges was it was difficult to get internet access. It's all state controlled. So what you do is you buy an hour worth of internet access. You buy a card and it of course gives you a serial number on it that you use to get access. What we didn't understand is that when you bought one of those cards, it was only going to work, say, at that hotel. So we would move to the next day to another hotel and try to use it,
Not gonna ask.
and it didn't work. And we couldn't figure that out. And it was at the very end, someone said, "Oh, you didn't buy this in Havana." I went, "No, we bought it outside." So, well, it won't work here. So
Well, and the other interesting thing is because we had very spotty self-service and Wi-Fi, we really weren't aware of how bad the pandemic was getting. And it wasn't until we went to Coco on the 14th of March that we saw CNN for the first time. And all of a sudden we saw what a mess it was. And I remember Michael and I watching the CNN piece, and we looked at each other and said, are we ever going to get back to our country? And at that point, we were pretty much, I don't care where we get in the United States, just land us. We'll find a way
Yeah,
to get back. to
I
our
bet.
country. Because, and when we landed in Havana, interestingly enough, on the 7th,
17th.
the 7th, when we landed in Havana,
Yeah.
the first part of the trip, all the workers in the airport were wearing masks.
That was the first time we had witnessed that.
Now, we don't know whether that was because of COVID or whether they always wore masks. And that was just part of their their uniform, so to speak.
No, they
Uh-huh.
don't always wear masks.
Yeah. So our guess was it was probably because of COVID. But there were very
Uh-huh.
few cases. Like I said, in Cuba, when we left Cuba, there were 5 cases. So it hadn't really hit there like it had in our country and
Mm.
others.
When we got to Atlanta, it did take us about 2.5 hours to get out of the airport, waiting to get through customs. And of course, we were probably in line with 300 or 400 people. Nobody had masks and we're all really close to each other. So
And I told Michael, if we're gonna get COVID, this is where it's gonna be. Because, you know, we had no choice but to be in the customs line.
Yeah.
And of course, we kept hearing, you know, don't get close to people, stay away from people, have a mask on, and we had none of those. So I
Oh
figured
my
if we
God.
get it, we'll get it there, but we didn't. So we were very fortunate.
And so here we
Uh-huh.
are in Cuba, and we're all worried about the coronavirus. So I'm going to use the important room of your hotel room. And who makes the toilet? Corona.
Was the manufacturer.
Corona.
So no, not a good sign.
So given Cuba's, the way Cuba is run these days, the communist government of Cuba, did you ever felt you were being surveilled by government agents or anything?
No,
No.
and we arrived in Havana probably early afternoon.
Yeah,
So we were walking distance to the capital, that part of Havana.
right.
And the 2 of us just walked off. And of course, my biggest concern, because there's all these narrow alleyways, that we'd get lost. But no, I had no sense that we were watched.
No.
The biggest thing is you have all these owners of all these American tourist cars, so to speak. They're all trying to sell their business, their tourist service to you. But because obviously as an American, you usually stand out like a sore thumb.
Right.
But that was it.
Did they ask you to stay in at night, or were you able to walk around the streets safely?
If we went out at night, we went out in groups. It was typically to go out for a group meal to a local restaurant. I don't think we ever went out alone, but we were not told it wasn't safe. I didn't feel any,
How many days were you there?
we were there at 10, from the 7th to the 17th. And I didn't feel unsafe at all. I felt very, very secure, very safe. But of course, we were birding in outlying areas too. You know, we were away from the major city. Havana, we were there the first day and the last day. And the rest of the time we were out in the wild, so to speak, birding. I'm sorry, surveying, our ornithological surveying.
Right.
Uh-huh.
You were surveying. You were doing scientific research.
We were scientific
Yes.
research.
Don't ever forget that.
Yes.
When so you guys were over on the far western part of the island, Pinar del Rio.
Mhm.
That's allegedly where the ivory-billed woodpeckers are still in existence, is over on that end of the island.
Mhm.
Was there any talk of ivory-billed woodpeckers?
Oh, we didn't tell you, we saw several. No, did Luis mention?
I don't remember a
Luis
conversation.
mentioning the ivy bill.
No.
What did you learn when you were there, Bill? About the ivy bill?
Well, I didn't learn that the ivory bill was still in existence until we came back to the States a couple of years later, and Dr. William Suarez was doing research at the Royal Ontario Museum. He was with the Cuban Museum of Natural History in Havana. And so he was doing some work at the ROM in Toronto. So he drove down to Windsor and we had dinner with him in Windsor. And that's when he said that there were everybody's worried, looking for the ivory-billed woodpecker down in the southeast corner of the island near Guantanamo. It turns out that they're actually on the far west end, and he has seen them with his own eyes.
Oh,
Wow. Well,
They're on a Cuban military base. So there's not a whole lot of access.
yeah,
oh,
probably not.
okay.
Well, I wasn't able to add that one to my list. Sorry.
Oh, well. So any other questions for Mike and Judy?
Yeah. Did you have any problems with mosquitoes or flies or other pests?
Nothing.
No,
Not at all.
not at all.
Mike, can you hear me, Mike?
Yeah.
Oh, in one of the first pictures you showed, you were drinking a Cuban beer. How
Yes.
was the beer down there?
They were great.
Was it good?
I think I had one every day.
It was called Crystal or something like
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Crystal
Yeah.
beer.
One of the interesting things, when we paid for the trip, everything except your alcohol and I think a few meals we were going to be expected to pay. At the end of the trip, we didn't pay for one drink. We didn't buy one meal.
Yeah.
Amazingly enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Wow.
Wow,
It was
Who
amazing.
paid for
Pretty
the
good.
drinks?
They took good care of us.
they took care of
Oh,
us.
really?
Yeah.
Wow, that was wonderful.
Good tour.
Of course,
So
Michael said if he knew that, he would have had more beer.
Probably 5 a day instead of 1.
Being an expert in Cuban beers, there are essentially two beers made in Cuba. There's Cristal, which is the one that Mike was drinking. That's the light beer. And then there's a dark beer, which is called Bucanero. So it's really rich and caramely. So I like Bucanero. It's a pretty good beer.
Did you eat anything out of the ordinary that's we wouldn't have expected you to eat?
Not really. Nope.
Nothing odd.
So Mike, you were gone for 10 days, so that means you shot probably 1,000 pictures a day then, right?
Could have been. Could have been.
Uh,
Easy.
All right. Well, I'm going to let everybody go. Thank you very much, Mike and Judy.